Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Inside Scoop. I am once again your guest host, Marcus Simon, member of the Virginia House of Delegates. I am joined today by a good friend of mine, our former House Democratic Caucus Executive Director, Trevor Southerland. So Trevor and I are going to be talking about, a couple of weeks ago, if you joined us, we talked about some after action from the election mechanics wise, how many people voted, how they voted, why some people had to wait in line so long, and when we could expect to see results. But Trevor is going to give us a little bit more of a political after action report. We're going to talk a little bit about the one state issue that was on the 2020 ballot, which was the constitutional amendment on redistricting. And then we're going to start already to preview 2021, because in Virginia, we love elections so much that we have them every single year. And so the 2021 election cycle is really already well underway. I think by the time this airs, we may even have some more announcements of even more statewide candidates to talk about. And in preparation for 2021, we'll talk to Trevor, who is around, and he was really inside the room where it happened in 2017 and 2019 when Democrats almost and then finally did break through the red wall and take over the majority in the Virginia House of Delegates, and then eventually the Senate as well. So with that intro to what we'll be talking about for the next hour or so, welcome, Trevor.
Thank you, sir. Good to be here.
So normally I have Trevor give some of his background. Trevor, tell us a little bit about your background and what you've done and what your connection is to the House Democrats, and then maybe a little bit about what your role was during the 2020 election.
Yeah, so I have been working in politics since I was a kid in Georgia. I got my start in Georgia and was there for about 10 years, worked a couple campaigns in Tennessee, the state I was born in as well. Then moved to Michigan, where I was the finance director for the Senate Democratic Caucus for a year and a half there, and then came to Virginia in 2014. Started out as the finance director of the House Democratic Caucus for the 15 and 17 cycles, and then in 19 I was the executive director when we took the majority. Last year, did some work on my own, most importantly on Amendment 1, where I worked with the no side. We came up just a little bit short, but ran a really good campaign, and we're proud of what we did there. And looking forward to next year when I think everybody is running for something.
That is true. So let's back up for a little bit and talk about 2020 and the no campaign. So you and I both worked on that together. And as you may know, I remember I was sort of one of the vocal opponents on the House floor back in March of the amendment. And I think we came within about 8 or 9 votes of actually defeating it on the floor in favor of a substitute I'd proposed, which would have actually gotten us to truly nonpartisan independent redistricting, which I think is the gold standard that most of us are hoping to achieve, those of us that believe in redistricting reform. I think there was some debate, I guess, about what the best approach was going to be to trying to defeat it at the ballot box. There were some structural challenges that we faced and some basic imbalances, which is, not least of which was that we were up against a great big organization that had been organized, for years and years around this area, and we knew had the ability to basically, with fairly little notice, go out and raise some significant funds. So tell us a little bit about, we brought you in, I guess. Finally, we as much as we tried to run a stealth campaign, we realized at some point we're going to actually have to get this thing launched, and brought you in fairly late in the process. Talk to us a little bit about what some of the challenges were with what we were facing trying to support the no, getting people to vote no on this.
Yeah, well, we started in mid-August is when we launched the PAC and when we really got the no campaign started. And of course, the yes side had an organization backing it that's been around for about 10 years or so. And they had obviously been already spending money and already working on their side. Our big victory on the grassroots level was the Democratic Party of Virginia's state convention voted to endorse the no side, as did most of the Democratic committees, especially all of the ones in Northern Virginia, many of the ones around Richmond and Hampton Roads as well. So we had that going for us on the grassroots level on the Democratic side. But sometimes people think of state parties or even the DNC, and they think of some endless flow of money, some endless stream that's coming from somewhere. And that quite simply isn't the case. So even though we had the state party on our side, it's not like we were going to get millions of dollars from that. It was a very grassroots campaign. We also had a couple of considerations to take in on our side. I mean, at the end of the day, the yes side spent, I think, a little over $5 million. We spent
Wow.
somewhere around 150,000. So, you know, obviously, people who say money doesn't matter in politics, it does. It really matters. They were able to out communicate us left, right, and center. And at the end of the day, we just couldn't reach enough people, even with the great grassroots support we had and the social media support we had, which was outstanding. It's just not possible to reach enough people when you're outspent that much. This was also the first time we really had early voting in Virginia. So it's a different type of campaign. That combined with the pandemic, meaning a lot of people voted early, a lot of people voted by mail. I would venture to guess that probably half or more of Virginians that voted on Amendment 1 didn't know anything more about it than what the ballot language said. And the ballot language was intended to get a yes vote. And that was probably the most successful strategy that the yes side had, is that if you hadn't heard of it, if you had never read it, if you just read the ballot language, you probably voted yes.
Yeah, it sounded pretty good. And yeah, that was yeah, as you mentioned, we started that process back in the back on the committee dais, and we did the best we could to try and put some of the it's sort of hard to put the negatives in a question that the General Assembly just passed, right? So how do you get the folks to just pass the amendment and therefore support it, to put in language that says, but on the other hand, right? It's on the one hand, on the other hand. So yeah, it's a pretty positive message. The other challenge was, I think, normally when you're going to be outspent like this, one strategy is to try and have like sort of a stealth campaign, right? And get everybody at the last minute when it's too late to respond. I mean, you and I had talked about some of these things. I think, had we not been in a pandemic year, and had we not had this first year of early voting, there's some things that we could have done maybe to keep it closer. Like, well, let's wait till October. Don't do anything until October. They think, they sort of sleep on it, thinking that it's a done deal. Then we do a blitz, late, and then we get people at the polling places, right? And there's things you could do, in a underdog campaign like that. But this year they just, none of that was able to happen.
No, no, not at all. This was the perfect storm year for something like this, and it got the votes.
Right. Now, I mean, and it's interesting to watch, because you talk about, again, does money matter in these things? And it's funny. People can say, the mailers don't matter, and it doesn't. But we know from some of our polling that, initially, after sort of our initial negative push, we got after sort of some wins. We got the win with the Democratic Party, and we started working some of the local parties, and we got some polling back that showed maybe roughly, just actually a little under 50% support for the amendment. And then you watched the finance reports, and you saw the money come in, you saw the mail go out, and then we saw the final result, right?
Yep, exactly.
So, I mean, I think we got them down at like 48% at one point. But then after spending all those millions of dollars on direct mail, and I think urban radio, I think, was one of their more successful spends. The final outcome was roughly 2/3, right? 66 or so, something like that.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and that's some of those ads they had. I mean, I remember somebody who reached out to us and said, hey, I was listening to this radio station, and they endorsed it. They said to vote yes, and it was really just an ad. All they had heard was an ad, but what they thought they heard was their trusted radio station that they rely on to give them news, telling them to vote yes. So advertising is effective.
Yeah. And digital does only reaches so far and so many people. it does give you that kind of saturation. I think that still traditional things like mail, and I think in this particular case, radio. And I think also, we got a little, maybe some false sense of security from the Democratic committee votes. I mean, I knew from sitting in on some of them that, although we'd say, hey, look, we had, 3/4 of FCDC, voted to, to take the no position on the absentee ballot, or the sample ballot rather. If you looked further back at that, there was a much closer vote as to whether to take a position at all. So, the vote on what to do on the absentee ballot was sort of after the fact. And so I think even within the Democratic Party, I think behind, I think some people were good soldiers and good loyal Democrats, but when they got back into that voting booth, I think we probably lost a lot of that support. Would you agree with that?
I would, and that's that also just shows you that there is a ton of people that aren't active in the local committees. Those of us who are, we see it. We see the people who come. I live in Hanover County. We regularly, back when we met in person, would have 150, 200 people at our county committee meetings here in Hanover. And, we're about a 30, 35% Democratic county. But when you go to the meetings, you would think there's a lot more just based on who's there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And the signs and things that you normally could do, and there's nobody at the polling place to read the signs, right? So many of the ballots came in by mail or came in by Dropbox. I think you're right. I think the language itself on the ballot probably was more decisive in this particular ballot question than in most years, where you can get an alternative explanation into people's hands somehow. Now, the other part of it, frankly, too, is that even when we had folks at polling places in the in-person voting, I think there were a lot of people because of COVID, that were literally, hesitant to put something in people's hands because they were trying to maintain their social distance at the polling places. So, anyhow, so enough about that. That's what happened. It's not that we're not brilliant tacticians. It's not that we didn't have great ideas, or that we're not really good at what we do. It's just circumstances. And frankly, I mean, it's hard to argue against reform, right? Particularly for Democrats, we love reform.
Yep.
We're progressive, and reform sounds like progress. So putting that one behind us in the rear view, and to prove that we're not horrible at politics, and you in particular, I want to talk a little bit about 2021. But before we get to 2021, maybe spend the rest of this segment talking about 17 a little bit, and then we'll see how we do about 19, and then we'll spend the second half either finishing up 19 and talking about what's coming up in 21. So you were not the executive director, but you were basically his right-hand man, and did the finance piece for the House Democrats in 2017. And one of the things you and I like to say, actually, I think we've exchanged some texts about this, is everything that folks that follow national news see Congress doing, we did it first in Virginia. Starting, I think, in 2018, you heard there was a lot of talk about, and a lot of some heated caucus meetings, and some questions about whether Nancy Pelosi would be able to secure the votes she needed to hang on to the speakership. Well, the year before, we weren't quite in a position to elect a speaker, but we had just come into our own. Donald Trump had been elected, and there was actually an internal coup among House Democrats for the minority leader position. And then ultimately, the minority leader, after beating back the coup, said, I had enough of this, and announced his retirement. And we had an election. And all the things that you saw happening then in 2018, we had just sort of gone through, and a lot of the same questions. So do you want to talk a little bit about what 17 was like from a staff perspective, and how you saw sort of some of those parallels?
Yeah. So in 2017, the job of the caucus in this instance is to look at how we can pick up the most seats. In 2015, we had managed, the Republicans had a supermajority at that point. We managed to pick up 3 seats in 2015 and break that supermajority. So we were up to 34. We were able to sustain a veto, which may not sound like a big deal now to those of you in the majority. But, if you remember back to 2015, that was a really big win for us, being able to just sustain that veto of Governor McAuliffe and not have to rely on the Senate.
It made us relevant. It made us relevant one day a year. I loved Veto Day 2016 and Veto Day 2017. We actually had some relevance. We could win some votes.
Well, and we saw when we got to that point, we saw some great shows of caucus unity. There were a couple of bills that had gone through the House with a couple of Democrats voting in support. So they had passed the House, either 69-31 or 68-32, a veto-proof, override majority in the House. And Governor McAuliffe vetoed them. And when they came back, the Democrats stuck together and they upheld the governor's veto. And it was quite an exciting thing to see the look on the Republicans and the speaker's face when they thought something would go through the same vote it had during the session. But the Democrats stuck together because even if they had voted for that bill, they said, I need to uphold Governor McAuliffe's veto pin here. And so I remember that veto session, and the first couple of times we beat them back, and then I think they just skipped quite a few. They just decided, well, we're not going to just keep bringing these votes up; we'll just skip them and go on. But in 2017, we did three candidate trainings. We did one in December of 2016. We did one in, I want to say, February of 2017, and then one in either late March or early April of 2017. And so the people who had decided to already run, they came in December, and then so on and so forth. And that last training, we had to change locations. We had to go to a big auditorium because the space that we had always used for our candidate training, we just had too many people running. And we invited every Democratic candidate who was running. If you were running in a primary, not against a sitting member, but if you were running in an open seat primary, we invited you. For example, we had Kathy Tran and Tilly Blanding at the same training. We had Danica Rome and a couple of her opponents in the primary at the same training. Our job as the caucus was to set those people up so that whoever came out of the primary was ready to turn to a general election campaign. And so even
And
though
that was a change in mindset for us, right? I mean,
Mhm.
typically it's like you're on your own through the primary. Let us know when you're the nominee, then we'll talk, right? And
Yep.
but this was now, of course, 2017. This is after this was after Trump's inauguration. It's after the Women's March in Washington. It's the beginning now of these huddles starting to form, and indivisibles are popping up all over the place, and people are being told, you want to resist, run for something, right?
Right.
And so we had people that really did answer that call.
Yeah, we did. We did. Some of them are in the house right now. So we set that up. We were ready to train those people and teach them about what a House of Delegates campaign is. We did not teach policy. We had one section, it was about a 3-hour section, where we brought people in from unions and other groups and said, talk about your policies to the candidates. But we didn't tell them, this is what you run on. And, that's something that is a debate which continues to go on in our party. I tell people all the time, it would be much easier for me to be a Republican operative because they have a much simpler plan. They have a much simpler path. And the reason is they're a much more monolithic party. Their candidates, their members, their voters, they tend to look and be and come from similar backgrounds. We have a diverse variety of people from all over, all different beliefs, all different backgrounds. And that can be hard to say, here's our one message. So we knew they weren't going to have one message. We had to set them up for how to run the campaign. We saw in some of our polling in 2017, the most important thing we saw was a momentum shift. When we do polling, we ask voters, okay, so you're going to vote for X or Y, and then we say, how excited are you to vote on a scale of 1 to 10? And typically, when we do that before in 2015, Republicans were always 2 to 3 points more excited to vote than Democrats, which meant they were more committed to voting. No matter what they heard, they were going to be there. And we saw in 2017 that Democrats had taken that. They were more committed, they were more motivated, they were going to get out and vote. So we didn't see the wave getting as big as it did. I'm not going to say that, but I did. When people would ask me my prediction for election day, and we needed 17 seats to win, they asked me how many I thought we could pick up. I told them between 3 and 19. I thought that was a good guess. I thought we'd at least get 3. We may get as many as 19. We ended up at 16, so I'm pretty much a genius.
Right. Well, it's like the weather forecast, right? I'm going to give you a range. It will be between
Exactly.
freezing and 104 tomorrow, right? And that much I can guarantee. Well, yeah, it was interesting again watching all that play out, and I can't say, and we still get this a lot. I think that you're not the only one who's jealous of Republicans and the simplicity of that message. I mean, I hear that from candidates and frankly from elected members. What's our message? It's very frustrating. Republicans have a message. It's really easy: liberty, lower taxes. More freedom, less taxes. Why can't we have a simple message like that? And the answer is just that we really, I mean, it's a more nuanced than that. We are, in fact, a big tent. It is a coalition party, and different folks have to come from different places. And so it's interesting. Tell us before we get to the break, though, what is the caucus? I mean, it's funny,
Yeah.
coming in, when I first got elected, I just thought the caucus was just a loose sort of assemblage. Like, well, I'm a Democrat, so the other Democrats are my caucus. But there's more to it than that. So we have an executive director, when you say the caucus did and so forth. Tell us a little bit about what you mean. I think probably a lot of our people watching don't know how caucuses function.
Yeah. So the weird thing about a caucus is that it's many things in one. Sometimes when you say the word caucus, you could be referring to the 55 members independently who literally sit in a room and caucus together. That is the Democratic caucus in the House of Delegates. You could have, for example, in Alaska, they sometimes have, they currently, the Republicans should have a majority in Alaska, but you actually have a group of independent Republicans who caucus with the Democratic caucus. And so that group, that Democratic caucus, is in the majority there. So you have the members themselves. Then you have the staff. In 2019, we had a 12-person staff. In 2017, we had a 6-person staff. You could be referring to the staff that runs the day to day operations and the campaigns, or you could be referring to the PAC, which is what the staff gets paid out of, how we pay for campaigns. So it's sort of just all these different things. It is not a part of the state party though. It is independent. Its job is to get the majority in the House of Delegates, and now it is to hold the majority in the House of Delegates. So a caucus is many things. The way I used to tell people when I was the executive director was that if it was something good and you were referring to the caucus, you were talking about Marcus Simon and Eileen Kilborn and all those great people. And if it was something bad and you were talking about the caucus, you were talking about me.
Well,
So
and if you want to do like a federal analogy, right? We're like the DLCC or the DS, whatever, the campaign committee and the policy committee and everything kind of all rolled into one in Virginia because we're not
yeah,
as big and not as well funded, so we have to kind of multitask. So when you're talking about these meetings you had in the candidate trainings, you guys were functioning, I guess, a little bit as both the staff and tell us a little bit about what you. Speaking of the fact that we're a PAC, a little bit about what you warn candidates about when they come to the training about what they maybe don't want to say about PACs.
yeah. Well, I mean, look, you have a lot of people that are going to say a lot of things. And what I think you need to understand about some of this as a candidate is that people see PACs all as one thing, but there's different types of PACs. There's leadership PACs, there's independent expenditures PACs. On the federal level, there's super PACs. There's dark money groups, which are more than often C4 or C3 organizations, but sometimes people see them as a PAC. We do have some people who say, I'm not going to take any money from X group. Well, that's not always what that group is. For example, if you say, I'm not going to take any money from Corporation A, well, Corporation A may have a PAC that has no corporate money in it. It's their employees funding it. So are you not going to take money from that employee PAC? And if you're not taking money from Corporation A, what about people that work for Corporation A? And how far down does that go? Does that only apply to the executives, or does that go all the way down to, the people making close to minimum wage? So there's always these questions. And when you say these big, broad things, you get pulled into this Grover Norquist type trap, where the Republicans said no new taxes. And then they started calling it a user fee or something else, because they couldn't say taxes because they said no new taxes. So, we do have some people who they don't take any corporate money, or they don't take any corporate PAC money. They don't take money from lobbyists. That's fine. But they have to define that, and they have to know how far down that goes. And that can sometimes land you in a tough situation.
Yeah, it's funny. As folks get more experienced, you see the descriptor of what they're not taking gets a little longer and more detailed, right? It goes from, I'm not taking any money from PACs, which means, by the way, you couldn't actually take any caucus money, because the caucus, when we say caucus money, and that when we're talking about in those terms, we're talking about the PAC, because that's what holds the money. So I'm not taking any money from third party PAC. Well, okay, unions are okay. All right, I'm not taking any money from corporately funded PACs that get the majority of their contributions from corporate sources, right? I mean, so this pledge is starting to, again, the more you know, right, the harder it gets. And so I think that was a big part of the education. So when we come back here in a couple of minutes, I will talk a little bit about that 2017 race that you said landed us 16 seats, I guess, right? With 15 pickups and 16 new members, right?
Yep, exactly.
And then what about when you took over as executive director? So we'll talk a little bit about the 19 campaign and what we did with Donald Trump and what we didn't do, and how we used not just polling but different things to kind of come up with a strategy to try and take the majority. I'll say one interesting note about the 2017 election before we finish. Parallels 2020. In 2017, Ed Gillespie got more votes than anyone who'd ever run for governor in the state of Virginia before, except for Ralph Northam, who he was running against, right? So, this idea that the turnout was high everywhere. And not only did record numbers of Democrats turned out, but record numbers of Republicans turned out as well. Just like in 2020, Donald Trump will have the second highest total of popular votes of anybody. Thank goodness Joe Biden got more. So I will be back with my guest, Trevor Southerland, the former executive director of the House Democratic Caucus. We'll see if we can get him to spill some secrets when we come back in just a minute.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
America, land of the free. It's at the core of who we are. Freedom. The freedom to live without fear, to drive through all 50 states, to sleep safely in our own beds, the freedom to jog where we please, to watch birds in the park, to wear a hoodie, the freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because no matter your religion, gender, disability, age, race, all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Our fight against coronavirus isn't over. Let's wear face masks in public. Stay 6 feet or more from others. Follow state and local guidelines. And wash our hands frequently. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Inside Scoop. I am your guest host again, Marcus Simon. And I am joined today by Trevor Southerland, who's our former executive director for the Virginia House Democratic Caucus. Trevor and I have been talking about the 2020 election, talked a little bit about 2017, We're working our way towards 2021 and what's going to happen next, but needed to set some context for you. And so we had just finished talking about the 2017, and Trevor got his prediction exactly right. He said between 3 and 19. We picked up 16 seats that session, which, by the way, was one short of what we needed. And actually, we were a hair's breadth. I mean, we are as close as you can possibly be to picking, to at least creating a tie and getting to 50-50. That was the year that Shelley Simons in Newport News lost on a tie vote when her opponent drew his name out of a bowl. I guess the election official drew her opponent's name out of a bowl at the Art Museum of Virginia. So if anybody tells you a single vote doesn't matter, and I won't tell the story about the delegate's daughter who was attending school at Christopher Newport that November and went ahead and voted absentee at home for her dad in a safe district and actually could have won the race for Shelley back then. But at any rate, we ended up at 49 to 51, which made for a much different caucus for Trevor to have to deal with. A lot of these people we talked about first half hour that had, I mean, literally, off the street. They've been, at the Women's March said, run for something, and they threw their hat in. And now all of a sudden they were delegates. They became candidates and politicians and incumbents. And by the way, Trevor, I think you'd agree with this. All of them political geniuses, right? I mean, how else could they have defeated these longtime incumbents that nobody had ever beaten before, right? So they all had different theories as to why they won. Tell us a little bit about your sort of after action analysis of 17 and what really happened now that we're a couple years out without naming names. Well, you can name names. I'm still in the caucus, right? That's part of the reason we had Trevor on is that Trevor is a former executive director, so he can tell us all the stories. But
all right, I got my list here. So,
so anyway, I won't agree or disagree with anything. I'll try to do my best poker face. But tell us your after action about what was the reason we did so much closer to that 19 end of the scale and not the 3.
Yeah, well, there were a couple things in 2017 that we did that hadn't really been done before. And if you were a candidate for the first time in 2017, you wouldn't know that. So, for example, we had over 70 field organizers on the payroll of the House Democratic Caucus. And the reason we had that was we started a field program while there was still a gubernatorial primary going on. The gubernatorial primary was fairly hard fought. It was fairly close. And so there was not a coordinated field effort that was able to start early because they didn't know who the nominee was going to be. So we went out, we hired people, and then we put them into the campaigns. So we would give 2 or 3 field organizers to every campaign. That was something we had not done before. In 2015, we did not do that. So it was something we had done to help build that support we were seeing because we knew how important field would be. So that was really exciting. We picked up, and I think you were right earlier, we picked up 15 seats. We had 16 new members because Jay Jones won in a seat that we already held. So we picked up the 15 seats. We should have had 16, which was Shelley Simons. We thought for a minute we had 17 in Dante Tanner, which would have been the majority. But after everything was done, after the court cases and after the bowl was drawn out of, we were 1 seat short. And I will tell one story that I won't name names, but it did involve the people who won in 2017. So you can go look them up if you don't know who they are. We had after the campaign and everything, me and some members of leadership got together with them, and we were going over what went right and what went wrong. Well, a lot of them had primaries, and what we did in the primary was we trained you, we answered your calls, but we didn't involve ourselves. We weren't putting the finger on the scale for one candidate or another. And so you might have thought we were, not participating or we weren't doing something to help you, but we were behind the scenes preparing to help our nominee. And so in this meeting we had a list. I want to say there were about 30 or 40 organizations on this list. And I said, this is what I'd like you to do. Tell me when your first contact with these organizations were. And, they had the list. We went through it. And I said, great. And for everyone except one of the organization's name, the caucus had spoken to them earlier because our job is to win the seat. So we had already started talking with organizations like Flippable and Swing Left and those groups that were popping up in that time to say, look, this is what we're going to need to win this seat. You guys may or may not get involved in the primary. That's up to you. You're an outside group. But we're waiting until we have a nominee and we want that nominee to be ready to go on day one.
Right. And I think those
So
groups, when people don't understand, those groups were asking you and me, but mostly folks like you, not necessarily who to back, but where. Like, where can we pick up seats, right?
yeah,
They didn't need to know who yet, but where is Prince William County? That seems like a good place, right? Virginia Beach seems like a good place. Where should we be investing? Where should we be looking? Because people were desperate. And that's the other thing, frankly, about this field program. The difference between 15 and 17 was you guys couldn't have afforded, I don't think, to run the field program in 15, but 17, thank goodness for Donald Trump. I rarely will say that, but the interest and Virginia being the very next place where there was an election, as people were still feeling the sting from that and looking for something to do, I think must have been a big help for you guys.
yeah, it was. It was tremendous to have that outpouring of support, those people reaching out from not just all across the nation, but we had quite a few people in Virginia who had not been active. I mean, I went in December of 2016, I went to this meeting in Loudoun County. And I kind of laughed because people went around the room and introduced themselves, and most of them had been active in politics for a few months, and they had already had some splinter groups because of disagreements they had among the first group, and they wanted to register voters. And I said, well, have you contacted the Loudoun County Democratic Committee because they have this thing called the van, and they can help you see where people are and aren't registered. And the people in the room had never heard of that. So, it was yes, we need you to do this and we have a way to do that. So let us help you by giving you those tools. And they did for the most part, and it was great. And it led to picking up 15 seats in 17 and then picking up the majority in 19.
Yeah, and I do remember before we move on to 19, but just briefly, I think that one of the roles the caucus had to play, and one of the things that our staff and those of us that are members did, was figuring out how to integrate the old guard with the new. Right? We have the party establishment, for lack of a better term, and I don't say that in the political way, like their political views, but folks that have been there forever, right? Precinct captains and the leadership groups, and that had been every year, come rain or shine, or standing out there at the polling place, handing out sample ballots, had been there since 2004, 2001, 1997, and whenever. And then all the people that were newly energized and knew better than us, and were going to tell us why Donald Trump had won and everything we were doing wrong. And we just need to get everybody, put some of those conversations aside and get everybody rowing in the same direction. And I think you guys were able to, again, I think the House Caucus played a pretty important role in building those bridges and making sure nobody felt too put off or dismissed. So great job. We come close, but not quite there. The Republicans, suddenly start being a lot nicer to folks like me, seeing that things may not always be the way they were, and they may not go back to the way they had been in 2015 anytime soon. And so now we start planning for 2019. And we've just had a 2018 election where, by the way, the results of which happened in 2017 were duplicated, right? And the high end of expected House pickups, we got almost there in the U.S. House, and then we heard again, Nancy Pelosi held on to her speakership, and again we had record turnout in a congressional year, and so now we're getting ready in 2019, and a lot of people aren't sure we can do it again. Maybe we've already got all the low-hanging fruit. We have House members decided that they're already too big for the House. And they want to run for state Senate. So we've got like newly picked up seats where we don't even have the advantage of incumbent. So tell us a little bit about what we started to do in 2019.
Yeah, so in 2019, and this is again, we started this in 2018. We did a lot of analysis of the districts. We did a lot of number crunching to see where we were. And the most important thing that we wanted to do early was in 2017, one thing that happened was we ran 88 Democrats. We were in 88 out of 100 seats. I don't have the number from 2015, but it was in the low 60s. Um, so we had run in more seats. We had made safe seat Republicans have to do something for themselves back home rather than just spend money in competitive districts. So we wanted to keep that going. So we started candidate recruiting. I'd go down to Southwest Virginia. I'd go down to South Side. I'd go into places, districts where we honestly probably weren't going to win, but we could talk to people about this is how we rebuild the party in this area of Virginia. This is how we rebuild. And it's by running candidates because people have to know what we stand for. They have to see what we're doing. So we had some really great people who were running in really unfavorable districts. And in 2019, we were able to recruit 92 candidates. So we topped the 2017 number. We got four more. We still didn't get quite to 100, but we ran 92. The Republicans did not. I think they were at 70. So we had some Democrats in safe seats who were unopposed, and they were able to help fundraise for the caucus and for those candidates in competitive seats. Whereas if you're a Republican in a safe seat, even if you know your district is 20 points safe, you still have to do something. You're not going to just do nothing and assume it's going to turn out. You're going to send out a mailer or two. You're going to stay home and go to events rather than going into competitive districts. So we set that up. We did our candidate recruitment. We knew where we wanted to target. We knew what we had to hold. We did a massive polling effort. We had an over $1 million polling effort. And this is one of the things that we learned from 2017 that we did better in 2019. In 2017, when we were doing polls, we were having a hard time getting answers. We were having a hard time getting enough sample counts in the polls. And part of that is because there were outside groups polling at the same time. They didn't know our process, so they wanted their own numbers. They wanted to see what was happening in the districts with their people. So in
They would
2017,
ask you, Trevor, where do we have a chance? Where should we vote? And they're like, I'm not sure I believe you. And,
yeah,
and frankly, I mean, one of the problems of having so much money, right? Is, oh, we got this money for a poll. We'll just do it ourselves, right?
exactly, and they did, and we still managed to get to where we got to, but there was a lot of money spent on polling in 2017 that didn't have to be.
Right.
So in 2017, we had formed a partners table working with those folks, but we didn't get as integrated as we needed to. We worked through 2018, and by the beginning of 2019, that partner table knew what we were going to do in polling. They had talked to our pollster. They knew what our modeling was. They knew where we were looking, and they trusted our numbers. So we ran a $1 million polling operation, but we probably saved 2 million because these other groups were not running their own polls. They were looking at our data. In Virginia, we don't have a wall, so there is no separation. You can talk to everybody. And they were able to come in and instead of spending, money on polling, they were able to go straight up with TV ads or straight up with digital ads or do some mail. And they were able to help take that because of that polling investment we had made. We also made the same investment in field we had made in 2017, but this time we did it as part of a coordinated operation. It was me for the House caucus, the Senate caucus executive director, the executive director of the state party, and the executive director or the senior advisor to Governor Northam's PAC. We got together, hired a coordinated director, ran a coordinated campaign that helped the field presence that picked up those couple of seats in the Senate and those 6 seats in the House to get us the trifecta that we have now.
So, and beyond polling, we're not just talking about necessarily like the IVR polls and the surveys. You guys did something else, and this is going to lead to, I think, maybe some of what we talk about when we talk about what we need to do in 21. But you did some other things to make sure you were hearing from voters and understanding what was important to them and their values and things. Tell us a little bit about that part of the process.
Yeah, so we did, I think, a total of 7 focus groups. We did some in Northern Virginia, some in the Richmond area, and some in Hampton Roads. And, one of the things we talked about earlier was how Republican campaigns are easy. They're much more monolithic. Democratic campaigns, we have coalitions within coalitions within coalitions. Like, you might be in one group, but then there's breakouts from that group. And that's how the Democratic Party is structured. But when you get down to it, when Republicans say we're not focusing on kitchen table issues, when they say we're doing identity politics, they're wrong. The problem is we sometimes, especially white Democrats, allow them to get away with saying that. They're wrong. If you are a black parent and you are nervous about your child being able to walk home at night, that's a kitchen table issue. If you're a Jewish parent and your child is watching synagogues be vandalized and attacked, that's a kitchen table issue for your family. Maybe not for mine, but for yours it is. And same things when it comes to LGBT Virginians. You know, when we allow Republicans to say, "Oh, Democrats, they're focusing on these identity issues. They're not talking about the kitchen table." What they mean is the kitchen table for them, the kitchen table for their mostly white Christian families. And so we've got to take that back. Those focus groups that we did allowed us to see, what are people talking about. And so we would recruit people for the focus groups that would represent a section of the populace. And one of the things that we saw was, for example, we had one focus group of Black women in Norfolk. We had one focus group of Black women in Prince William County, and it was two completely different sets of issues. They had two completely different sets of priorities. They wanted to see different things from the Democratic Party. They had different views regarding Governor Northam and Lieutenant Governor Fairfax and the scandals of that year. They totally different. So whenever you hear somebody say we ought to nationalize all politics, we ought to just run on anti-Trump, we have to use that. You can't not acknowledge Trump. You can't not acknowledge what's going on a national level. But in a party that is not monolithic, you can't just nationalize everything to one thing, because even Black women 200 miles apart from each other had totally different priorities, what they expected us to represent. So those focus groups helped us see into that. They helped us fine tune our message so that we were still running on the same issues. We were still talking about affordable health care. We were still talking about the minimum wage. We were still talking about those issues that Democrats believed in, but we were talking about them differently depending on where we were in the state. And that's something that, especially when you talk about what happened in 2020 congressionals, that you really have to look at. All politics is local. You can only nationalize it to a certain extent.
So what was the final tally? And so we used that strategy right successfully. We retained all of our seats in Prince William County. We picked up the Shelley Simon seat in the Newport News area finally, with a little bit of help from the courts. We won't even get into that at the moment with redistricting, but the messaging worked right to the different parts. So tell us, what was the net for 2019?
So the net for 2019 was a gain of 6, got us to a 55-45 majority. We did not lose any incumbents or any incumbent seats. So even those folks that decided to run for the Senate, we held those seats, and then we picked up 6. So
I think that was probably, in my view, for what it's worth, Trevor. I'll let say something nice. I won't make you say it about yourself now, but I think that was about the best you could have expected. I mean, the 3-19. I think probably, going into 2019, if you said we'll pick up 6 seats and not lose any of the seats that we've got, not just our incumbent members, but the seats that some incumbents abandoned, and frankly, in districts that Trump won, at least one case, I would have said that'd be an outstanding result. I thought 53 or 54 would be great. 55 is fantastic. We won some really close races. The Stolley, Nancy Guy seat was 10 votes, I think.
Yep.
So we didn't have anything that came down to a pull from a bowl. But I don't think we were on the losing end, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we were on the losing end of any of those, where if we had just done something a little differently somewhere, diverted a little more resources, maybe we could have done something. I think that, there's some seats in Virginia Beach that we had some high hopes for that didn't come out as well as we would have. But again, and a lot of that was that we did have this data available, and we followed the data, and then we made the spending decisions based on where the data told us we had a chance. So at any rate, let's move on, because we're getting down to the last 8 or 9 minutes here. So 2020, as you said, a lot of recriminations, right? Like, what did the Democrats do wrong? What do we need to do differently? Frankly, this discussion of black women I just find fascinating, right? Because in 2020, we got that with the Latino vote, right? Hey, wait a second, are Latinas with us or not, right? I mean, well, they were in Arizona, but they weren't in Miami and South Texas. Even we lost more than we thought we would, and so I think we're figuring out again because, like I said, everything at the national level we did first in Virginia. I think people are realizing that you can't. We're a big tent, but it's you can't just lump groups together by identity and by ethnicity, but you've got to find out what issues matter to folks where they live and where they are. So, of course, Abigail Spanberger had an explanation too for why her race was a little bit tighter, even as an incumbent in 2019 than in 2017 or 2020 rather than 2018. I have my own theory about that, but tell us a little bit about what she said briefly, and then what you sort of heard her. You got a really good tweet about thread about what people are saying she said and what you heard her saying.
Well, so Abigail Spanberger was on a call with the House Democratic Caucus at the national level, and on this call they were talking about what went right, what went wrong. Nancy Pelosi was talking about they held the majority. Allison Spanberger was upset about some of her colleagues who had been defeated. And, the thing she brought up was the defund the police slogan. It was the talking about socialism. And, she said that she got hit hard on defund the police. And so she sort of was going off about how we can't run, an AOC style campaign in Richmond, Virginia. And then there was a lot of backlash to that. It went all, but I listened to the audio that came out, and it was actually 3 minutes of Spanberger talking. The tweet that went viral from a reporter was, a 200 character whatever tweet. It did not cover the 3 minutes of what she said. And what you get into when you're talking about this is oftentimes both sides are a little bit right and both sides are a little bit wrong. Defund the police is bad messaging because that's not the only thing that message entails. It entails more community funding. It entails more, rapid response forces that are trained to help the mentally ill. A couple years ago, I had to call 911 because I encountered a gentleman passed out on the street in my neighborhood. And before the fire truck and before the ambulance got here, 5 police cars got here. The cops took a much different approach to that gentleman than the people in the ambulance did. I'm not sure his whole story. Maybe he had a background. I don't know. But, if you call 911 and you're asking for help for somebody that's in a crisis, what you want is a professional who is trained to deal with that. And right now, all of that burden almost falls on our police departments as the first responders. And that's not fair because that's not what they're trained to do. And it shouldn't be what they're trained to do. There should be different people for that. So, what Spanberger was saying is that if you just say defund the police, that's horrible messaging. And that's what Democrats do, though. We have a 90-minute explanation about our 3-word chant. Republicans, it's very simple. Lock her up. It's simple.
Right. So what do you think? Two-part question. We got about 4 minutes left. So what do you think caused the loss of seats in some of these down ballot races? And what advice would you give to the next executive director of the House Democratic Caucus to avoid suffering the same kind of setback in 2021?
Well, I think one thing about 2020 that I've heard other people say, but I haven't heard it focused on much. 2020 was the first time that Trump was back on the ballot himself. And so in 2017 and 2018 and 2019, if you wanted to take out your anger on Trump, you took it out on a Republican running for Congress or Senate or House of Delegates or State Senate. You couldn't take it out on Trump. Well, now in 2020, you could vote for Joe Biden, but still vote for your local Republican candidate. And I feel like that's what a lot of people did because they actually had the ability to take it out on Trump for the first time. And so you have to see that down ballot it doesn't always continue the way we think it might. People don't always vote that straight party ticket. If you're talking about the House of Delegates in 2021, you've got to really focus in on what we have, how we defend those seats. And then there are a couple of pickup opportunities, I think, and you can't let the Republicans go on the offensive. You've got to keep them on the defensive some. That's what our plan was in 19. That's what we were able to do. We kept them on defense. I hope that we're able to break. I hope that 92 candidate record is broken again. I would love to see us get to 100. You've got to stay on offense, even in the majority, without risking losing that majority. And that can be a fine line to walk. But I know we've got some talented people who will do a good job at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting challenge, right? And now, because of course Republicans will attack us on the policies we enacted. We need to claim victory though, and I think stay positive about it, as opposed to, like you said, falling into a defensive posture and trying to defend it. I think it's a really interesting observation, right? That you made, that the only way you could hurt Trump, in prior elections was indirectly. I'm going to send Trump a message by voting for Jennifer Wexton over Barbara Comstock, for example. But if given the opportunity to actually just punch Trump right in the face himself by voting for Biden, the urgency about doing that further down the ballot probably wasn't there. And I think we had that record turnout, right? And I think you had a ton of, I think Trump does frankly motivate some people in ways that other Democrats that aren't as frankly as Trumpian as he is probably don't. So it'll be interesting to see the challenge, to see if the folks that were activated in 2017 by Trump's victory and those people that we talked about earlier, having to try and weave them into the traditional Democratic apparatus, if we can get those folks to stick around once Trump is gone. And I think the best thing that could happen to us, frankly, is Donald Trump announces that he's running in 2024. Because thank God, I mean, please, Donald, you can do it. Don't let any of these other guys talk you out of it. So listen, we are just about out of time. Our guest today was Trevor Southerland. Thank you, Trevor, so much for letting us know what happened in 2017, 2019. I think your advice for 2021 is right on. My style. We will stay on offense every chance we get. We will let everybody know when the Republicans are acting Trumpy and out of touch with Virginia voters. Believe me, my Twitter finger is ready to go. And I know that you're there. I don't know if we can put up Trevor's Twitter feed one more time. It's a great follow. So thank you guys for joining us on Inside Scoop. Give Trevor Southerland a follow on Twitter. It's always entertaining, particularly now that he doesn't work for anybody else. He's free to say what he wants. Thanks, and see you next time on the Inside Scoop.